All right, hello everybody. Welcome to the Las Vegas UX Meetup. Just wanted to share with how grateful I am with all of you being here. And if you have the chance, please check us out. I believe this QR code brings you to the LinkedIn group. Yes, we're pretty active there. If we're not active, we're still aware. So anyone's free to share their discoveries within the design, UX, product community. We're there to appreciate and support. And thanks to our team over here, the Meetup team, which is composed of Olga, Abigail, myself, Gerardo, who's currently in DC, Melvin, who's in Mexico right now, on his way. We've been supporting this meetup as a team probably from the last year, right? And it's a lot of work, a lot of creative minds coming together, ensuring that UX has a presence in Vegas. Particularly because one, UX is a really big and important topic and a lot of product and just design in general. So whether you're talking about city infrastructure or going as far as what we do with our stovetop and microwave and how that interface works in our apps, that's a part of our wheelhouse. Now, with all that effort said, we're going on hiatus after this month. And I want to express my gratitude for everyone that has attended these meetups over the last year in particular, last year too, because we put a lot of coordination to ensuring that there, as I mentioned before, there is a UX presence in Vegas and supporting all the startups and business folks here that have attended and that we network in. This meetup was started probably right before COVID, 2019, 2018, by Vicky Comrie, who passed the mantle over to a number of us. And it's pretty hard running a meetup group, I would say, and in the last year in particular, much of it was thanks to Abigail's leadership that really brought us together on a consistent basis, because one of the challenging things about this meetup is consistency. I want to bring up a quote from Banksy because he's become popular for being revealed recently. The quote I wanted to bring up was, what was it? If you get tired, learn to rest, not to quit. And that's very important because, especially being a UX designer for a very long time now, probably like 15 years, I think, worked in a variety of industries. One of the biggest challenges is that we can do the work once we know the system and we can do it well. The problem is that we don't recognize that we do need to take breaks, whether it's official or not. We don't have to tell our PMs all the time, but for us to regenerate those creative energies to discern what is important for the user as much as for the project, we need to be able to give ourselves some space. And so we tend to forget that we are creatives at the end of the day, and be able to take breaks is very important in our entire career. So with that said, thanks to the team and for all those that attended. It's been a great year so far. However, this doesn't mean the end. What I do want to emphasize is that if anyone has any ideas they want to bring to the table, the team is willing to support anything that they want to talk about and share on this particular platform. We'll rally around and ensure that whether you or a peer wants to share those ideas, we'll come together and bring that to life. And with that said, for our speaker today, Abigail, we will be talking about a very important topic that may not seem directly interfacing with UX, but it has a whole lot of impact. So with that said.
Thanks, JD, for that. I also wanted to mention, as we're on hiatus, we are taking a hiatus from Tech Alley. It's just hard to be consistent on a monthly basis coming here, but stay tuned. Join our LinkedIn group if you're not already, because we do have some intentions on online workshops or just having a presence. So stay up to date by staying connected on LinkedIn or Instagram, and I can leave that back up here. This link tree will send you to either our Instagram page or our LinkedIn group, where you can stay up to date with maybe future events. All right, so today we were supposed to do a font walk downtown Las Vegas. And so this presentation is supposed to be prefacing before going on that walk. When we planned this originally, we didn't anticipate that it would be 96 degrees outside, and so I will share a route at the end of the presentation of if you are interested in doing this maybe later today, then you can do so, but I don't expect us to go. It's a peak heat right now, and so enjoy this presentation about the psychology of type, specifically here in Las Vegas. So first of all, why does type matter? It takes 90 milliseconds to form your first impression on a design. So how fast is 90 milliseconds? Well, it's quicker than a blink of an eye. It's more accurate to be fast as a page loading. So imagine that you're hitting home or you're clicking a button on your computer and you see a new page. That's how fast 90 milliseconds is. And as soon as a page or slide passes, you already have an impression of what you're seeing on the screen. Type also helps with readability, comprehension, and retention. So you can see the typeface that I chose for this presentation is probably not as legible. You can see the A and the D, they have similar sizes. The D is slightly only longer than the A, so it kind of makes it shorter or harder to read. So when picking out a type, it's important to pick things that help with legibility. Type also helps with brand recognition. Fun fact is that 95% of branding is typographic. And in this presentation, you'll see different types of logos with just the type. And you probably won't realize that most of them are just with their type faces rather than having an icon. Type also helps with visual hierarchy. If you look at this slide right here, you probably read visual hierarchy first, then guides the reader's eye, and last, why type matters because it's smaller. But understanding how headers and subheaders work help you to understand what you're reading and in what order to read them. That's why when you look at a newspaper, you'll see the headers that are big and bold and take your attention, followed by subheaders. And then when you read the actual paragraphs on a newspaper, you'll see it in columns rather than one straight across the page, and it's because your eyes take longer and your head actually has to track from left to right. And so newspaper columnists actually wrote in columns so that you can read the different articles a lot faster. Font also helps to evoke emotions, and so not just what you're reading, but the font itself. Like, I don't know if what emotion evokes the font that I chose for this presentation. Maybe modern, maybe I'm trying to be cool. But it definitely helps with the unspoken. And lastly is conversion rates. When you put all of the things together, hierarchy, brand recognition, making a first impression, ultimately we're trying to convert users to using our apps or websites. So it's important to understand how type works so that users don't get frustrated and drop off. So I want to talk about a brief history of type and how did we even, I'm going to use type and font interchangeably. There's actually a difference between font and type that I forgot, but you'll hear me talk interchangeably about that. So a brief history about fonts and how they came about. It started off in Mesopotamia, where you have these clay figures, and we used the iconography to represent the things that we were trading during that time. And so you'll have a fish symbol that represents fish, or barley, things like that. And then the Greeks were like, well, we're not trying to recreate the wheel and need to have, thousands of different characters to represent the things that we're trading. So why don't we just come up with an atomic system to spell out different words? And so that's how the Greek alphabet came about. And then you have Rome, where they just fancied up the Greek alphabet by inserting hats and feet for the different types, and that's how you have the Roman alphabet. And then, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Gutenberg press, but back in the day, scribes would be the ones who are actually writing the Bible, and that's how information would be passed, as just scribes who were writing down this information. And this person was like, hey, we're going to design this instrument to help us to mass produce. And so it went from mass distribution for the Bible to let's use this thing to produce books. And so that's where we have all these different font foundries that popped up during all around Europe. And what these foundries did, they're not just printing, print shops where you can, print out different posters or things like that. But these font foundries more like design studios, where you have Garamond, Baskerville, Caslon, and other famous typographers who looked at these letters and studied them. And there's this tension between legibility and craft versus legibility versus craft, like making something that looks beautiful versus something that is legible. And so that has been the duality that these font foundries kind of had different philosophies on. So if you look at Garamond, he wanted to perfect things, and so it's very uniform, very light and airy. I think this person was from Paris. And then for Baskerville, I don't know if you can notice, but some of the type is a lot more high contrast, and they were in the camp of let's make it more legible. If you looked at the fonts at the same size and same weight, which you'll see later in the presentation, you can definitely see the differences in the sizes and how it affects that legibility. And then you have Bodani, who was more on the extreme side of let's just make things that look great. And so for Bodani, this font is very equal in its sizes and shapes, very geometric. And you'll see that Bodani is used more for luxury brands today. And then on occasion, you have people who break the script and don't want to be following patterns. And we can call these the rebels. So starting off with Dadaism, that's a response to World War I, where everything was orderly. And they were like, no, let's forget that. Let's literally rip up different pages and put them together to break the rules and show that things can still be legible without having to follow them. And then on the other extreme, you have the Bauhaus movement, where it was more symmetrical and more geometric, and definitely a lot more simple. And Bauhaus is kind of the movement that helped to spur on modernism, and their philosophy is design and craft should be accessible to everyone, not just like the upper echelons. And so you'll see a lot of Swiss modernist design or furniture come from the Bauhaus movement. And then you have other movements like the punk and grunge movements, where again, it's kind of just rebelling against the social norms of those times. And the techniques that they used is more like copy-paste, using scissors and magazine cutouts to create different graphics. And what all four of these movements share is the same core argument. Legibility is not the highest value. Sometimes the most honest, powerful human thing you can do with type is make people uncomfortable, because when you have that emotional reaction with your type, then you can actually get people to stop, pause, and think about what your message is. And then we fast forward to the computer age. And so you may or may not know that Steve Jobs took a calligraphy class at Reed College, and that kind of sparked his love for design and typography. And so when others who were in the computer space were just using regular 8-bit type, Steve was like, you know what, I want to interject this artistry into my computer designs. And so, are any of you familiar with some of these fonts? Hello, welcome. So these fonts are designed. He commissioned Suzanne Kerr to design these different fonts. She also designed the Mac icon here with the smiley face, and she did this by using a grid and literally stamped things out pixel by pixel. And Steve Jobs kind of, with the Mac, introduced how we read on our computers today. So something that I didn't mention earlier is with the people who established our golden standards for serif fonts, these are like how you read in books. And if you notice that during the computer age, most fonts that are used are more so on the sans serif side. And I don't know what it is or why it makes it more legible, but that's kind of like the culture that we created, is with books you have more serifs, and then with computer you have sans serifs. And then I want to talk about the Vegas font landscape. So I don't know if you've noticed driving around the Strip or downtown, all the different types of fonts that you see, all the different influences from Western culture to like futuristic, but I want to highlight some of these differences that you might see if we were to go on Fremont Street or downtown. So first, when Vegas started to boom from the 30s to 40s, you'll notice that the culture was very Western, and these signs were typically made out of metal or hand painted. And the people that were creating these signs, they weren't designers, they were regular tradesmen, and they just borrowed what they saw moving across the West. And when the first casinos went up during like Fremont Street, we didn't really have a design industry. There were no agencies or foundries. So these craftsmen or the people who owned the casinos were just borrowing their aesthetic from the American West. And you'll notice that the fonts are more bold, they're hand painted, they're kind of just brutal and plain in sight, because the goal was just to stop people who were driving down the road looking for a place to go. And so the idea is, let's just have something that's bold and interesting so that they'll eventually stop. And what's interesting is, this was your marketing budget back then. When you're on Main Street, like everything competes for attention, and so that's why they used these bold letters and the bright contrasty colors. And then you have the 50s and 60s. So this was a really interesting time in Vegas, because now you have, I think it was after World War II, and during that time, America was obsessed with the future. So you have a lot of atomic energy, space travel, the promise of technology. And for Vegas, it was still a blank canvas. And so people who came to Vegas during that time were just looking for escapism. And the designers of this time, there was an electric sign company called Yesco, and that stands for the Young Electric Sign Company. They became like the most influential one of the most influential design firms here in America. And they were designers, engineers, scientists who used tubing. So the neon signs, they're the ones who created neon signs to create some of the iconic historical, what would you call, signage of the different hotels during that time. And what's interesting is that during this time, they treated these signs as not just signage, but actual architecture. So you can see the dunes. I don't know if you guys seen some of this in person, but these signs are like, they make them really ornate. So it's more than just the typography, but it's also like a landmark to know where this hotel actually exists. And then I want to point out, the very famous and very iconic Welcome to Vegas sign that everybody knows. It was designed in the 60s, and something that I want to draw attention to is how there's at least 4 or 5 different fonts within that sign itself. And by every rule in typography, it shouldn't work, but it does because of just the way that it's positioned. There's like emotional weight to it when you're driving down, and that's the first thing you see on the strip. It kind of excites you, especially at night. So that's just some of the Vegas imagery during the 50s and 60s. And then the strip started to boom. Downtown, you had more and more of these signs. And so it became harder and harder to distinguish yourself from other places. And so you'll have just a clash of different typography. You'll notice that there's some that have more script of a font, and that denotes glamour, like the Sands or the Riviera or Flamingo. And then some of the more Western hotels kept that Western and blocky type. But during this time, there's just so much going on the Fremont Street that it's basically like you have to grab the attention somehow to get customers in. And I think using like the different light bulbs and flashing techniques really helped to allure people in. And then you have the 90s to today. We've gone away from using neon because it was expensive to maintain. You're also limited in the colors because of the different gases used in those neon lights. And so we switched over to LEDs. And with LEDs, you can do anything, any color, animation, you have different resolutions. So that's what you see today, is more saturation of color, more imagery, and less typography. And I'm going to just read something that I read from an article when I was doing some research. So I thought that was really interesting. The thread that runs through all of this, from the hand-painted Western letters in the 20s all the way to the sphere, Las Vegas has always used type not just to inform, but to seduce. Every font choice on every sign was making a promise about the experience waiting inside. And that's exactly what we do in UX. From the type on a landing page to the CTA on a button, we're trying to make promises to the user about the experiences. And that's something that I wanted to tie together. All right, that's a little bit about the history of typography and a little bit about Vegas. Now I want to talk about how to read fonts, how fonts talk to us. And the first thing I want to bring up are the different font families. And so the first family is serif, and this is, going back to the time when the printing press came out, born from Roman letters with the hats and the feet. And notice that these fonts typically are used to create trust, heritage, as well as authority. And remember earlier when I was talking about the different type, Garamond and Baskerville, you can kind of see now that it's at the same size, the different weights, and how it affects the legibility. So a little bit of participation here. Which of these 4 fonts would be most legible in your opinion? Times New Roman? Why is that?
The decoration of the letters makes them distinct. And it's also so prominent now to where I think we are trained to recognize it really well.
Good answer. What else? Yeah, so with Times, that's what they were trying to do, is to have such high contrast in the different nuances and the different parts of the letters so that it's a lot more legible to the eye. And a fun fact about those who are dyslexic, sometimes they get letters jumbled in their head because of the weights. Like, for example, maybe an F looks similar to a T, but once you have, and I know it's really tiny, but on the F, there is like a little knob at the end of the F, and those parts help to anchor the eye. And so for those with dyslexia, there's different fonts that actually help have more high contrast to help with accessibility and legibility of different characters to make them a lot more distinguishable. I wish I included that in the presentation, but just know that different fonts have different weights, and that helps with the eye to have that movement to make it more legible. And so, as I said, serif fonts are used typically for things that need high trust and high authority, and so you'll see it used with luxury brands or even newspapers or law firms and things like that. So here's an example. A fun fact is that the Declaration of Independence was printed in Caslon font. That's something that I learned, which I thought was interesting. Hello. And then the second font family you have is sans serif. So literally just taking off the hat and the feet of different fonts. And once you have these type of fonts, it evokes more forward thinking and it helps to command attention at a distance. So a lot of these fonts are modern, clean, and honest. Some of like the most recognizable fonts online are Open Sans and Arial, and a lot of brands use Helvetica. And so notice that the logos that I have up here are more so SaaS products or things that you'll find online or can be associated with more modernism. And you'll see a lot of it in advertising as well. The third type is script, and script has a lot of different connotations to it. It can be fancy, it can be more childlike, it can be just your own handwriting. But the reason why you would use a type of script font is so that you can come off as more personal, either elegant or even just more creative and playful. And I've noticed a lot of script font when, for some reason, this is just examples of brands that use script. But what I wanted to point out is script is used a lot in wedding advertisements and stationery. I think it adds that elegant touch for couples. And it's also used a lot in food packaging. And I think it's because when you used handwritten font, it kind of shows that, hey, our food is organic or it's more personable, like we grew this ourselves, it's not something that's mass produced. And then the last type of font family is the display type, and not to be confused with sans serif, but display fonts are more so for bold impact, and these fonts derive from the 1800s when there was a lot of advertising and you would need to stop someone so that they would read your advertisement in a magazine or something. And so it commands attention, it's bold, it's loud, and it's urgent. And the font that I used for this presentation is definitely one of those display fonts. It's more decorative than your normal fonts. And these fonts are used usually just for titles or for logos because you tend to lose legibility on them. So they're not recommended for headers or for body copy. And so a lot of the brands that I mentioned early, 95% of branding is just typography. And so you can see that a lot of these display fonts are used for different logos. I don't know if you can even tell which logos I took away the actual iconography, just to show you that most of these are typographic. So just an example of the display fonts, how they can be used to grab your attention. And then lastly, before we get into the route of downtown Las Vegas, if you were interested in doing a font walk yourself, is how to actually look at fonts. So you might want to take a picture of this, but these are the five things that you would want to look at if you were trying to understand fonts and what they're trying to communicate. So the first is weight, and it goes from fonts that are thin to black, or like the heaviest, thickest weight. And so fonts that are heavier, they are powerful, they are dominant, they are dark. The font is saying, I'm here to stay and you can trust. Versus fonts that are thinner and more elegant, more vertical, think like the Vogue logo. These come off as more elegant and approachable. So a lot of luxury brands will use something that's more light, or just something that has a lot more contrast. The second is formality. So from casual to formal. And with serifs, they lean more formal. So think of Times New Roman, think of your law firm logos or banks. They want to command that, hey, this evokes trust. And then scripts, like you saw earlier, they can go different ways depending on what's used. The next one is spacing. So depending on how tight versus how loose the type is, something that has tighter tracking, and what tracking is how much space there is between letters. The tighter it is, the more urgent, versus the wider the letter spacing is more calm. So I wonder if I can go back. You can probably see that a lot of these are tighter together. And so those ones, like Wikipedia, I would say it has that tightness, and it also has more of a lighter weight to it, and so it kind of evokes this knowledge. We know that Wikipedia is for knowledge, right? And so, like, you can see how if you're reading these brands, you can look at the things that we mentioned on the other screen to see why do these letters evoke the way that I'm feeling. When we look at these recipes, we can start to understand, oh, it's okay. It's because of the weight of it makes it feel more dominant, or because of the spacing, like it's so tight that it makes me feel like I gotta really read this. I mentioned earlier contrast. So when you have a high contrast, you can think of high fashion, versus something that's low contrast is more stable and more readable. And the last thing is geometry. So pay attention to the letters, how uniform they are. Things that have perfect circles can be interpreted as more modern or tech-oriented, and then things that have more organic, humanistic curves evoke warmth, craft, and being more artisan. So a perfect example of geometry would be the sans serif logos. Notice Google, Facebook, they're a lot more geometric. They're a lot more in the same weight, same size, versus something that if we looked at the script fonts, these are different, and depending on what kind of cursive is used, like Cadillac is a lot more luxurious versus Kellogg's is more whimsical and maybe child-friendly. All right, so if we were to go on the walk today, maybe we would do this another day. Maybe you want to do this even as you're going grocery shopping or you're casually walking around. But I did create these different scavenger hunt questions, if you will, and it just to help you notice as you're walking around and looking at different pieces of type. So definitely take a picture of this if you're interested. Maybe this is something that you can even do while you're in the theater, just looking around at different types. All right. Oh, did you still need it? Okay. So, if you scan this QR code, you can see on Google Maps the different stops. But the first walk would be downtown on the Arts District. It's really just going down Main Street, basically. And Main Street has a lot of great examples of type that you can notice. And what's interesting being in downtown Las Vegas, you'll still see remnants of the Western typography versus the futuristic type still exists. But definitely check out these different shops and see how they're using type. And then the second walk would be going down Fremont Street and seeing the different hotels, casinos, as well as bars and restaurants. But if you do decide to go on this walk, maybe we can do it again as a group in the evening when it gets cooler. But I would encourage you to post your photos on LinkedIn and engage with the community. This QR code will lead you to our LinkedIn group where would love to see your different finds from the scavenger hunt questions. And then last but not least, I wanted to share a few resources if you are interested in learning more about Vegas and its design history. First, there's this podcast that I listened to on 99 Invisible, and it was a great podcast to learn about the Strip and its skyline and how America there's like a love-hate relationship about Las Vegas architecture in the architecture and design community. And it's because it's so grotesque, right? You look at Excalibur, you look at Luxor, and during that time, it's like, why were they creating such, I don't know the word to use, but why was that popular and why was it successful? And why do people find themselves gravitating towards Vegas? Well, this podcast really goes deep into like the psychology of the different hotels, and I think it's a really fantastic resource to learn more about the history as well as the architects who built the different structures here in Vegas. The second resource is if you haven't checked out the Neon Museum, it's basically known as like an archive of all of the old hotel signs here, and they do a fantastic job of describing, like helping to understand Yesco and the things that they built during that time and the different signs and signage. They also have a really cool 3D mapped show presentation in the evening called Brilliant, where they use 3D projections and mappings to, along with Vegas iconic music, Liberace, Presley, to put on a great show. So definitely check that out as a resource.
Also, I wanted to add, a member of our UX Meetup community is going to design that walkthrough.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that. But that's all I had for today. it's a short one because we were intended on going on this walk. But feel free to stick around, hang out, and ask questions. If you want any of these slides back on so you can see the different walks, you can ask. But otherwise, that's it for today. That would be cool. Field trip.
There's already so many font styles in the signage. You know, I noticed that, I mean, like, with regards to fonts, there's something that changed, like, in the last maybe decade that I didn't notice until I was looking for it. You know how, in sans serif fonts, how the I and the L get confused together?
Mm-hmm.
Capital I and then L. Whereas in serifs, you have the kind of the marks that help you distinguish between the two. There's something else that happened with the O recently, where before numerical O had a slash. And traditionally they should always have a slash to distinguish the 0 versus the O. And now we don't see that anymore.
Yeah.
So now O and 0 get confused.
In some fonts, you still have that because of binary.
I thought so too. I looked it up, and it's not there. It's I don't know if it was in the last year or few. They removed the slash.
What else have you guys noticed? I'm just going to keep seated. What else, Olga?
First of all, thank you so much for heading this meetup for the last year. We had more than monthly meetups.
We did.
Oh,
A round of applause to Abby. You blew my mind finally. I understand why it's called Times New Roman. It never made sense, and now it does make complete sense.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know that you talked about how font is often branding, and looking at the pictures of old Fremont Street and stuff. Those casinos that are there, they still use their logos in the same font because it's their brand now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's, they rebuilt the casinos themselves. They're like, the Fremont Street looks very different, but those names are still in that font because that's their branding, that's their logo basically.
Golden Nugget, yeah.
Yeah, Golden Nugget, El Cortez. I don't know what else is still out
I
there.
think Fremont definitely has retained most of its branding compared to everyone else.
Yeah, and what's interesting is it was born out of necessity, right? Like, it's just people who are like, well, let's copy what we see in the Wild West, and that could be used for our signage. So now it's like, oh, this is the theme that you'll see for old school Vegas stuff.
I have a question about something I saw in your slides that I don't think you mentioned that also fascinated me. You said that in the Greek alphabet you would read back like in both directions.
Oh.
That it goes like this.
Yes, like how an oxen plows.
So one line you would read one way, the other the next way, and
Yes.
going switching.
And I think that's
cool. I
more
didn't know
so
that.
because of the way that things were written during that time. Yeah, when I was doing the research, I was like, oh, that's interesting that they go back and forth. Yeah, so you'd read the letters. Yeah, that was interesting.
So it was rebellious to read in one direction then.
Yeah, I didn't do the research on when it started to go from left to right. I think it was maybe the Romans that started to say, okay, none of this nonsense, one direction.
Going line by line, yeah. That's so weird.
I'm curious, what else did you guys learn from today? Because I had fun doing the research for this. Gail, what did you learn?
I just thought how fast things changed. If I had to think about fonts, I would just ask ChatGPT,
Yeah,
what font should I use?
right. That's a good question. Like,
I would even, they thought it's like an art, so much history is there. There's no time today to think about it.
right.
I just, if ChatGPT didn't answer, I would go to Claude or another chatbot, and that was the end of story.
I think, so I don't know about you guys, but at least In another role that I have, I do social media. And what I've noticed for the trends, it's veering away from sans serif or anything modern because it's definitely replicatable because of chat. And now it's leaning towards handcraft and more so like the graphic design of collaging, similar to what we noticed with the Rebels, is the trends that I'm seeing in graphic design today, because this is something that's more human rather than something that chat or Claude can replicate.
Basically breaking rules.
Mm-hmm.
So it leaves up to us to really discern what's happening on the screen. So it's letting us be the computer instead.
Yes, it's putting the power back into the creative's hands as opposed to letting chat, because ask chat to recreate something like this, it's going to have a hard time, you know.
True.
I think a big part of it too is that there's been, everything's just become so plain.
Mhm.
So it seems like there's this transition back to like more of that personal element, because brands have gotten from having like a lot of personality back in the day to now this like modernization of like just sleek, simple, which is great. I think it was, you know, a nice little sort of timeline for that. But well, I think companies didn't realize that it lost that personality or that personal touch to the brand. So kind of interesting to see that kind of cycle come back, right? And design as well is like that. I feel like there's just cycles of design, especially in the font world. So you can see it like with car companies. They're becoming a lot more modern, but I'm curious if they would transition back to like a more personal touch.
Yeah, there's a
You
quote.
can only do so much futuristic, right?
Right.
Whereas, like, once you get, like Kia, for example, Kia had a very oval logo. The font was very different, and then they just made it a lot more modern and just. So it's actually hard to read Kia, like the
Mhm.
font.
Yeah.
But like, what is the next step of that? Is it always just like now that futuristic element to it? But then like, what comes after that? I'm interested to see.
Just cycling.
It's an ebb and flow.
Yeah.
I think we get tired, like if everyone is simple and clean, that you do not stand out. And if everyone is busy and bold, you will stand out with your clean, and like it's just cycles, just like fashion, to where we do a lot of the same thing and people try to find new ways to stand out.
Right.
And then that becomes the norm and.
But I feel like it only helps when you are one of the first companies to do it, because then once every other
It
company
gets
does
fabricated.
and then you get washed out. Like, can you go back to the slide with the sans serifs? Because you can see like now that all of them are double versions.
This
you
one?
can see how-
Oh, no, sorry.
Yeah, yeah, like here, like nothing stands out anymore.
Right.
Probably FedEx the most, just because of the negative space. Like I always loved
They're more
FedEx.
right?
They're
But
never
all the
gonna
other
lose
ones
that.
pretty much blend in. Like I can't.
And it's right, look at your Uber. I mean, I guess they didn't have time simply.
Yeah.
And if
Right.
you look at this Uber, I think they didn't have time or resources to hire somebody.
Yeah, do something better.
So they just did it, whatever.
But I think like I remember like when Spotify and Google did their redesign, you know, it's just because Google had serif and then they went to sans serif here.
Mhm.
And it looked cleaner, but now it's just washed out because it blends in with everything.
Yeah, especially since Spotify looks like Google's font.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I intentionally desaturated everything so you can see
Yeah.
it for the font form,
Yeah, because now the other thing that helps
is color recognition.
because now with Google, right, Spotify green, the Netflix red.
Yeah.
You know, the FedEx red, all that.
Somehow Chanel stands out. And I can't figure out what makes
I
it.
think it's spacing.
I was going to say,
Light.
They haven't changed. Well, also their spacing is totally fucked, because either the N and the E is too far apart.
That is true. Between the A and the N is much smaller.
Yeah, and then
Than
the
rest.
E and the L is closer than the N and the E.
Actually, that's a good call. I think so, yeah.
it's not like-
it's not consistent, yeah.
I never thought about it. Yeah, the spacing is
But
different.
Chanel is black, right?
It's Chanel is black.
I think what they might have gotten that right though, to your point. Like maybe, because yeah, out of all of them, I think Chanel, but it's because that's how I always see Chanel. It's just black font
Yeah.
with the white background, and it works really well.
But has Chanel changed their font, or has that been
It's been the
around?
same.
It's the same.
I think it's forever.
Yeah.
So they were ahead of the curve with using sans serif.
Yeah, they were definitely ahead.
Oh,
That's
true.
right,
I noticed
that's
that
right.
too.
It's
Yeah.
very small things. But most of us only focus on C. Everything else just becomes a subconscious acknowledgement.
Right.
Mhm.
That is also-
But I wonder if, to that point, you just mentioned, like, the bottom is a little bit longer on that E. The top two are, I think, the same width between the E and the E and the L.
No, it's not. It's sort of,
Yeah,
yeah, the top part is a little longer than the middle.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, very subtle.
very subtle, yeah.
But you're right, though. If that was a normal font, it would be equidistant, even at least the top two.
Yeah, so it's very simple, but it's got these like little things that you have to look for if you're thinking about it, but then maybe subconsciously when we look at it, it's still different even though it's simple. Because there are all these
Right.
small things in it.
Because
Yeah.
in standards, right, typical standards, it shouldn't work, but it does when you just visually look at it, so that's interesting.
I wanted to touch on something that you all mentioned earlier about how people were, like a lot of us were trending, or a lot of companies were trending in one direction with design, and then on the other end, we would go for a more rebellious mix-up stuff. Usually there's a lot of breathing room for each of these phases, but now it's like contracting. The speed in which it's happening is happening faster. So aside from typography, I'm noticing this in fashion. So, last few years in fashion, everyone had very similar silhouettes and ideas color palette-wise. Nowadays, the recent runway shows, everyone's gone very avant-garde with their color palettes, their aesthetics and stuff.
They have
And I'm
to
wondering if
be.
there's a reflection between society and design at that moment. But the problem with everyone, all these fashion houses doing their own thing too much, is that you kind of lose what makes this brand this. And so when this happens enough times, you're fighting against a trend in society of which way do you want to stick. So Chanel totally lucked out, right? And Target is, well, no, Target went with the lowercase thing for a little bit.
Yep.
But it's whether you wanted to stand your ground or go with the trend of everyone else. Because fashion is making that mistake from a branding perspective, where a number of the houses, they're trying to convert to a very brutalistic uppercase fontage that you see in a number of brands right now. I think Saint Laurent, which used to be Yves Saint Laurent, they had Yves Saint Laurent used to be very flourishy, right? Or at least had a style to it. And then they went very flat Saint Laurent instead. And that flattened out my memory of them because I still remember them as YSL.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's weird. It's weird.
There was a car, the Jaguar.
Yeah.
As well.
Oh, yeah. The rebrand with Jaguar.
How bad that was.
Yeah.
Because, again, it's so out of touch, but to your point, I think it's interesting. I mean, you touched on a lot of points where fashion, trends in society, and
Yeah.
obviously, I always felt like graphic design or the creative space in general reflects a lot of that. But the rise of fast fashion maybe has attributed to that, and it's because, and especially our attention spans, right? You see that society now, short form videos, everything is short term, it's just quick, and there's less grasp on to your point, if a company does a rebrand, they have to stick with it for a couple of years because it's costly to rebrand your entire organization.
Yeah,
And then market it, and
That's right.
everything that comes with it.
that's right.
So to your point, it's they have to stick with it, but I wonder if, to your point as well, it's getting harder for brands to do that because we're living in such a faster paced society where
That's right.
information is quick, but then trends are even faster.
It's one of the biggest issues when you follow where the money is going. Because as
Exactly.
you mentioned with fast fashion, everyone was going through that trend.
Right.
So they figured, let's just spend a whole bunch of money. But now we're seeing it not work because we've seen at least one of the major fast fashion houses closed down. I think it was
Forever-
H&M closed down.
Forever 21?
Forever 21 of them, yeah.
Yeah, right. But yeah, and those were brands that we grew up with, right?
That's right.
So it's interesting to see where, and I'm not sure if it's because of the younger generation, but I'm not sure how old everyone is, but I'm a just late millennial. So for me, it's interesting to see like with the younger generation now, what we grew up on in the late 90s, early 2000s is now making a comeback. So again, that cycle of repeating,
Yeah.
but in that sense, it's like how, or yeah, like that cycle of like design is always repeating, which is interesting to see like, does that follow the trends of, are companies following that trend as well, where they're trying to like sort of stay relative or
Right.
Yeah, just like top of
Yeah,
mind or
top one. Yeah, I personally think that by following that trend, they rob themselves of seeing with clarity what they stood for. And you know, there is that, especially in the blogger space, authenticity is reigning over scripted content, right? And if we're following that little piece of thing that everyone's now following, instead of trying to be a persona that's trying to be their authentic self, then a lot of these like houses, a lot of these companies need to be more authentic, right? And stick to what
you
they
guys
stand
stick to
for.
that, exactly.
Right, instead of just seeing where the attention economy is going and sacrificing everything just to be there, right? Be present for yourself, not be present for everyone else.
Exactly.
Yeah, but if you will go to that slide where you got Uber,
Yeah,
look at Uber and look at Facebook. Facebook is like we're so small.
Yeah.
We don't even hope to become big.
well, and that's where things will live and die by their brand. So one of the problems,
Look at Facebook.
yeah, Facebook has always been that font,
Yeah.
right? So
They
that's,
haven't changed, yeah.
They
That's
haven't
I mean,
changed.
it's Meta now.
Now Meta, I haven't seen Meta's, did Meta have a brand yet? Like, I haven't seen Meta's
They have a
brand.
logo, it's just the word, but
Like Alphabet.
Yeah.
Google Alphabet.
Yeah,
It's like their-
Alphabet's like that font, right?
Hmm.
no, I think
Isn't Alphabet that font?
I don't remember.
Futura.
It's in Futura, I don't know. But Uber, my gripe with Uber is that it's a very forgettable
I know.
font.
Very, very good.
They didn't have time. This is how we read it.
Right.
They don't have time.
And it also reflects their company. Their company is
Yeah,
very
it's
like,
very-
let me just put something out there and just let them deal with it. And it's funny, bringing up Uber, I remember doing some user interviews with a few Uber drivers just because I was curious what they were experiencing.
Yeah.
Their business model is very much in service of the company.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's
Compared to like Lyft, right? Lyft will take a cost cut just so as long as you get good user experience. And their drivers are happy. Uber has consistently been a company that will cut margins in service for the company itself, not so much in the service of the customers or the drivers.
I mean, it's also kind of implied in the name, more
Yeah.
German, so more.
Right, no, that's a
Brutal.
great point.
Yeah,
So we have to really look at the origin of the inspiration. I think a lot of people are missing the anthropological impact of design. So let's say, for instance, some of the turmoil that we're experiencing in America today, not to get too social political, but a lot of the inspiration came from the Roman Empire. We're experiencing a lot of the same stuff the Roman Empire is experiencing now, predominantly for the very same reasons, because we were drawing from them. Because they only saw the good, they didn't really assess the bad parts to really cap that off. So working from a republic standpoint, their republic format will always face an imperial counterpart to it. And so we're facing that as a massive societal design. And so we have to be very careful from an anthropological standpoint, historically, what we're drawing our inspiration from, because we don't know at what point will that start to affect our existence.
That's
Fortunately, a lot of
deep.
these don't have too many problems. Chanel is a different issue, but
No,
Yeah,
but Chanel forever.
well, no, Chanel. So the founder of Chanel, for people that don't know, she was a pro-Nazi supporter. She sold out a lot of Jewish folks. That wasn't a big deal because the brand itself as fashion was very consumable for a lot of people. That suppressed a lot of her personal history. But at the end of the day, because that's not a big part of what they do as a design format, it didn't really influence at the end of the day what they put out. So that's not too bad. Uber, for some reason, decided to become more of a nightmare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think, question for everyone here, I guess, when it comes to this, or these companies here, and just a lot of companies using Sincere, because they've tried to trust, I think, people, because we're, like, for example, Google is for everyone, right? Spotify is what we try to target everyone. It's difficult with Jeep because sometimes, with some of these specifically, I guess just Jeep is the most controversial because Jeep is selling you a feeling.
Yeah, that's right.
More so
Yeah.
than, I guess the brand is the feeling too, though, right? Because with Jeep, like, you're not buying the Jeep for what it is. You're buying it for the experience of, like, hey, I'm an outdoorsy person.
That's right.
I like going off-roading. Like, this is what I saw that.
Yeah, exactly. That's what my friends bring up all the time. It's that feeling, that thing that they
Yeah.
can do with it, not just
Right.
the vehicle itself.
For the other ones, though, like Spotify, for SaaS companies, it's interesting, right? Because you're just using software. But, like, does that mean, like, what type of feeling does that give to a user? This is a very, very generic question, but I guess, like, just generally, how does SaaS companies, A, do that, but because they're so generic, they don't invoke such a strong personal feeling like Jeep would as a brand. Whereas, like, if I'm using Google versus, I don't know, let's just say Microsoft's, like, Suite, which is Google Suite, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's a good point. Jeep or like hard days.
Yeah, pretty close.
That involves a certain feel.
Right. That's more of a tangible physical product with a certain design. I guess you could say the same thing about SaaS companies where their software looks a specific way. But yeah, that's interesting. But Harley Davidson, that's a very specific market and sort of direction.
Well, you're both making a point that I read a lot is that comparing certain brands like Jeep and Harley Davidson versus like Google and Spotify. Google and Spotify's, a lot of these things are just tools at the end of the day. And technically, so is Jeep and Harley Davidson.
Right.
But they're a tool to a lifestyle versus these are just a tool to like some sort of digital front, right? Whether it's a knowledge result or a music result. Now, you could say that Spotify is an exception to your other experiences, but it's not ringing as strongly to me because they don't have a physical component attached to it, which to some degree still makes Apple more valuable because there's a physical, typically a physical component to their material.
But what they did well was software and physical.
Right.
So you understand Apple's quality of the product.
Yes.
Also their software. Whereas
Right.
I guess Google does that too. I'm not a user, so.
Well-
But for Spotify, it seems similar, right? Because what Spotify also sells is obviously the software, but then the experiences that come with using your software.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna
You
say.
use it with your friends or by yourself or
Yeah.
the creation of your playlists.
I guess I wonder how Gen Z views it because they've been born into these products that are existing.
That's interesting.
Right. So, because going back to your point about Apple being both digital and physical, the problem with it is that OS X and iOS has changed enough times that I don't synonymize Apple with software.
Interesting.
Right? Because you notice how different the shifts in OS X and iOS,
Yeah.
sometimes they're huge jumps. So I have no mental silhouette of what iOS or OS X is anymore. Aside from the types of interactions that I would expect from it.
Yeah.
But nothing as strong as like the stereotypical iPod case or the or laptops, stuff like that. So there is something valuable in recognizing that there is something that anchors us to physical products. But again, I'm wondering how Gen Z is concerned.
So for SaaS, I don't think it's just branding alone that will do enough
Yeah.
to keep a user. It's the experience. So I've been a Spotify user since its inception,
Yeah.
and recently went away from it just because of cost and started using YouTube Music. But it's the fact that it knows my algorithm enough to give me a personalized playlist based on my taste, or the Spotify Wrapped is a really big feature that everybody loves because it's personalized and shows you your data in a fun way. So those are like, if you just looked at Spotify's logo, it's like, oh, nothing compelling, right?
Yeah.
But it's the actual everything together, with the user experience, the algorithm and how it works, how it's personalized, all the nuances within the app, the art, like the album art, because they also make their own, right? That's that's what makes it more memorable rather than just looking at branding. But it's interesting for tangible products that the brand recognition alone, with outside of like the actual product,
Yeah.
makes it really like stand out.
I don't think Spotify realizes how we view it, because because what you're pointing out, remember how you mentioned like they have their own cover design, how they have unwrapped and stuff? Like I think they understand the unwrapped part, but I don't think they recognize we like their customized cover art.
I was gonna say, to your point, I think as you were saying that, I feel like these companies, what I was trying to point out earlier is that, to your point, I feel like these companies are missing that gap of that more personalized logo. But to your point, if you just like, if I didn't have no idea what Spotify was, and I just looked up this, I have no idea what it was.
Right.
Or what it's trying to evoke. For the most part, obviously, maybe it was a bit future or modern in that sense.
Yeah.
But I think there's a gap to what you just said, where there's this feeling like there's a way, obviously, but what type of product, what type of sort of logo invokes that feeling that you mentioned, where you tell the side.
Yeah, because right now,
It is registered trademark, right?
for which one?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We have a couple.
Yeah,
I'm
it's a
curious,
registered trademark. I think it creates like a character. Spotify without R would look totally different.
Yeah.
Why some do that.
Yeah, I think that's just
It's part
time.
of the,
About 7 years or so to get that art. Before that, you use TM, which is trademark.
Yeah.
And then eventually, after some time, your trademark gets registered and you can start using the mark.
Oh, okay. I actually didn't know that.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Because I use like copyright for now.
Yeah.
For my stuff,
Interesting.
even though it's hard to enforce a copyright.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah.
and Harry Potter, I feel like Noah.
The lightning
That
bolts.
That person or studio is making bank off of Harry Potter,
I know, right?
That's such a classic, like you just, you
Yeah.
can't go wrong with that. But again, to that point though, if someone's trying to come to this, I guess to that, there's some experience with it, right? Like you need to interact, not interact with the logo or the icon, whatever it is, but you need to, as you see this, and you see the movies or you read the books, you associate that with something, and that becomes, it just becomes the logo for that, right? Like everything Harry Potter stands for,
Yeah.
you know it by this font.
The thing that I think a good chunk of companies miss, and only the ones that really get it are lifestyle or things that you take with you, is the fact that you need to have a product which you can make it a part of your life, rather than us taking your life and making it part of it, because that's not sticky.
Interesting.
Because when we stick our lives to the product, that's kind of like pushing the buttons, eventually gonna fade, right? And then we're gonna have to make a decision of whether we loved or hated it. But if you make it a part of your life, like an accessory to your life, that's sticky, because now you make memories associated with this product when you buy your side. But I don't,
Actually, how you put it that way, I don't think I thought about it.
that's why Twitch is gonna die at some point.
Which one?
Twitch.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah, what is Twitch?
It's just a place where, yeah.
I was in their conference.
Oh.
What is Twitch?
Right, no, it's true, because before it was just a streaming platform, and then a bunch of genres of streaming, and then now it's like, well, now it's this thing where if you're streaming related, you go there, but if you're not, then it has no part of your life.
I think that goes back to the SaaS companies, or just in general, like physical versus software companies. Because I feel like software companies are easily, not replicable, but can go out of style or touch.
Sure.
Because, to your point, I never thought about it where you fit into their product or their, sort of
Their ecosystem.
versus it fitting into your.
Yeah.
specific.
Yeah.
Whereas like I have a certain camera, like me working with this and just like interacting with product creates, memories and just different.
And you're increasing its brand value by you having it.
Right, to you guys, but
Yeah.
for me, it's like interaction with it.
Right.
But now I associate that value, or even Apple products or whatever product you use, or computers. So yeah, to your point, I just think it's interesting where software companies have to kind of add additional layers to that experience to really grasp that. Whereas some companies, like even Google now, like Google's always, at least for a lot of us, right? Google something, or Google it, right? That was always the thing. You always go to Google to do that. Now with the rise of AI, it's like Perplexity is now coming up, or all these other companies that I associate now searching more so with those than Google. But because software can get easily replaced so quickly, whereas physical products, like companies have to work a lot of trust and have to work.
That's right.
And again, those experiences that you have with it are totally different than just the software.
That's right.
You know, I can go to google.com or perplexity.com, it doesn't cost me anything. But in order to buy this, I need someone's advice or, do a lot of research, understand, because I'm paying a lot more for it, for this end product.
And those product outcomes come back all the way back to not just user experience, but a brand's or a company's understanding of what makes us valuable to ourselves, not so much just the bottom line. Right.
Very interesting.
What time's the next meeting? 2:45.
We have time.
Anyway, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Good to see you, Gail.
We're going to miss you. Hopefully we'll see you again.
I'll be back in
Let me give you, my else has to run out.
We haven't given